Hi, this is Tamara from mooglyblog.com, and in this video I'm going to be demonstrating the stitch pattern that I've used in the Woven Warmth Crochet Set. This is a unique stitch pattern that I've come up with, and here I've used it both in rows and in the round. This set includes the Woven Warmth Crochet Scarf, Hat, and Mittens, all of which are free patterns you'll find on mooglyblog.com. To make this pattern, I used Red Heart Super Saver brushed and a USK 6.5mm crochet hook. This one is by Susan Bates. It's also super helpful to have some stitch markers. I designed this set in support of Warm Up America, and of course you can make as many as you'd like. Let's get started. Here we have the Woven Warmth Crochet Scarf, the first piece that I made for this set, and the piece where I invented this stitch pattern. At least I think I did. If you've seen it before, please do let me know. I'd love to know if it's got an official name. This is the side that I chose to be the right side, but in all honesty, I think both sides of this stitch pattern are equally attractive. So if I flip over our scarf here, you can see what's I'm calling quote unquote the wrong side, but I think looks just as appealing. And like I say, I honestly had a hard time picking. So you can see it's a beautifully reversible scarf. This particular one is made to the specifications for Warm Up America. It's about 6 inches wide and between 75 and I believe 65 and 70 inches long is what they are looking for. But of course, it makes a beautiful scarf for any use. And I really love this stitch pattern. If you look closely, you can see these rows are sort of interwoven together and features a stitch I'm calling the woven treble, again, for lack of an official name. We do use just a little bit of post stitches here at the end for some ribbing, but it's just decorative at the end of our scarf. Again, you can see the opposite side of the stitch pattern here and how all those rows weave together. So, since this is the piece where we work it in rows, let's go ahead and work up our stitch pattern in rows. So to begin the Woven Warmth Crochet Scarf, we start with a chain of 18. Then we are going to skip the chain closest to the hook and single crochet in each remaining chain across. Now for this pattern, we will be working a border or edging all the way around our scarf, so you can work into whichever part of that chain you prefer. I'm still going to work into that underneath hump just because it's my favorite, but if you want to work under either of the other loops or the other 2 loops, again, whatever makes you happy. And if you prefer, you can substitute foundation single crochet. The main point is just at the end of row 1, we have a row of 17 single crochets. So here we have our first row of single crochet, just a nice row to sort of set us up and create a foundation for our project. For row 2, we have another setup row, and we're going to start with either a chain of 3, or if you prefer, you can use a chainless starting double crochet, whatever double crochet substitute you prefer. Since that chain of 3 is acting as a double crochet, I'm going to go ahead and put my stitch marker really carefully there under those top 2 loops. So I know that that will be a stitch that I'll work back into when I come back along for row 3. So after I chain those first 3 to act as my double crochet or make whatever double crochet substitute I like, then I chain 1 more, which will act as just a chain or a chain space. And then we skip the next stitch. Remember that first 3 counted as our first stitch, so that one's already considered worked. We skip the next stitch and then double crochet in the stitch after that. There we go. Sometimes when we have a long row of chains, they like to twist up, so that's where I also like to have that stitch marker. I can just give it a little tug and sort of straighten out that row. Then to continue our way across, we just chain 1, skip 1, and double crochet in the next. Pretty easy. Chain 1, skip 1, double crochet in the stitch after that. And that should take you all the way across with a total of 9 double crochets made. So here we are at the end of row 2, and we've begun our mesh. Row 3 is our final setup row before we begin the repeat that will take us up to the end of our scarf. And we start again with a chain 1, and now we are going to half double crochet in the first stitch. After that, we are going to chain 1, skip the chain space, and half double crochet in the next stitch, so right in the top of that double crochet. And that is our repeat for this one. We're sort of mimicking what we did below, but now with shorter stitches with half double crochets. So we chain 1, skip the chain space, half double crochet in the stitch. Chain 1, skip the chain space, half double crochet in the next stitch, and that should take you all the way across. When we get to that very final stitch here in row 3, we want to finish that stitch with our second color. Here you can see I've almost finished row 2, and I have my second color ready. I'm going to use a little darker color here so it's easier to see than the white in the original. So I've got my chain 1, I'm going to skip this one, and I know I'm going to work in the top of that marked chain there because it's acting as our double crochet. So I'm going to go ahead and insert my hook here after yarning over. If that stitch marker wants to be in the way, sometimes it's easier to take it out first. Pull up my loop, and I'll give that just a little wiggle, let the stitch sort of settle itself a little bit, and then I will pick up our second color, drape that right over my hook, and finish the stitch with that one. Now, for this pattern, as well as for all the other patterns in this set, we do carry the yarn along the side or along the inside in the case of the hat and mittens. So we do not want to cut our first color after we switch to our next color. Just let it hang out for right now, right along the side. Same thing for that first end. You can just leave it there. We'll weave it in when we're all done. So now we're all ready rather, to begin our repeat and begin row 4. All right, so to begin our repeat and begin row 4, we're working with color B, and we're going to start by chaining 1, and of course turn if we haven't already turned. We always want to work back and forth across our rows here. And we're going to half double crochet right in that very first stitch. Now, it's not as important, I find, with the scarf as it is with, say, the hat or mittens, but using stitch markers in the first stitch of each row can still be really helpful with this scarf pattern. So after we've worked our half double crochet in the first stitch, we're going to work our first woven treble. I've abbreviated this WTR. Again, just sort of a term I came up with, so if you already know this stitch pattern, please do let me know. What we're going to do to work our first woven treble is we yarn over twice towards us, 1, 2. Then we're going to put our hook right in front of this first chain space and behind the chain space below. Let me pull my hook back out and show you that one more time. I've got my 2 yarn overs, but right now we're just going to put our hook in front of that chain, behind the next chain. That leaves open that stitch right underneath, the one that was unworked right there. We're going to put our hook right in the top of that stitch and pull everything out of the way there. Okay, so right now we've just got the top of that stitch right on our hook. We're going to use the hook portion of our hook, if you will, the actual hooky part, to pull those 2 loops forward and peel the rest of our work back. So I'm going to just push everything else from the previous rows back and away. So now you can see clearly on our hook, all we have is our active loop, our 2 yarn overs, and those 2 loops from the top of that unworked stitch. So now what we can do, this allows us to go ahead and yarn over and pull up a loop, and then finish our treble crochet. Yarn over and pull through 2, yarn over and pull through 2, and yarn over and pull through 2, and you see how we enclosed no stitches within that stitch. When I pull back up on my fabric, give that a little yank there, you can see it is woven through those chain spaces and worked in that stitch underneath, but none of those chain spaces are actually enclosed. So let's do it again. Let's continue our stitch pattern. To continue our stitch pattern, we first need to chain 1, skip that next stitch so it brings us to that next set of chain spaces. We can make another woven treble. Let's do it again. Yarn over twice, go in front of that first chain and behind the second. We're working our way down in front, behind, then through that stitch right underneath. Grab that stitch, peel everything else back and over. Push all those chain spaces out of the way so you can finish your treble crochet without anything in the way. Let's do that a couple more times. We chain 1, yarn over twice. I'm going to push those up on my hooks. They're out of the way. And I'm going to jump over here to this next set of chain spaces. We go in front of the first one, behind the second one, and through that stitch. Grab the stitch, pull it forward so that nothing else is in the way, and finish your treble crochet, just like usual. Then we chain 1. We're going to skip the next set of stitches there, so we yarn over twice, come to that next set of chains there. We go in front of one, behind the other, and through that stitch. Grab the top of that stitch. You can see we just peel all that fabric back out of the way. It's just yarn. It'll straighten back out. Then we finish our treble. Pull up our loop, yarn over and pull through 2, yarn over and pull through 2, and yarn over and pull through 2. Let's do one more. Chain 1, yarn over twice. Go ahead and take a minute. If your fabric's getting wonky, straighten it all out. Pull it out nice and flat. Find those next set of chains there. So we go in front of one, behind the other, and then through that stitch, front to back, just like we normally do. Pull that stitch forward and finish our treble crochet. So we're going to do that all the way up through that last set of chain spaces. All right, so now I've worked those woven trebles through each of those chain spaces and chained one and skipped one over all of those stitches. So we come to the very last stitch. We want to mirror what we did at the beginning, and we just put a half double crochet in that very last stitch right there. And with that, we have finished row 4. Now, when you finish it, it's probably going to look kind of wonky. It's going to look more like this. It's going to look kind of crazy. Take a moment, set my hook aside here, put it on that stitch marker so maybe it won't roll away on me. There we go. I'm going to lay this down. You can see I just flipped it over. We're just going to take a moment and really pull up on that fabric, and you'll see it straighten out and start to come together. So now we're ready for row 5 of our repeat. All right, so to begin row 5, we're going to continue with color B, and we chain 1, and then we want to put a half double crochet in that first stitch. That's going to be pretty consistent here. Having a half double crochet in the first and last stitch, that's going to be consistent throughout our repeat. And except for that little setup row there at the beginning, a couple at the end, that will be our standard here as we go on. So we've got our half double crochet in the first stitch. And now we're going to repeat sort of what we did when we did the second row of mesh down here with our half double crochets. But you'll notice our pattern's a little different. We can't chain one and skip one right away. We've got another stitch right there. So we're going to put a half double crochet right in the top of that stitch. And then chain 1, skip the chain 1 space, half double crochet in the top of that treble, the woven treble in this case. So this is kind of mimicking that half double crochet and chain 1 row we did before, but now of course we've got to match the row below it. So we half double crochet in the stitches and chain 1 and skip 1 over the chain 1 spaces, setting ourselves up for another set of mesh on the next row. Oops, I yarned over twice there. Only need one because it's a half double crochet. As you can see, this row goes pretty darn quickly. We're almost at the end, so we'll just stay together here for these last couple stitches. Again, I just chain 1, skip 1 over the spaces, and then half double crochet in the stitches themselves. So for this row, again, we come to the end, we've got a stitch right there, and then our half double crochet right there. So I'm going to go right in that one. Pull up my loop, and now it's time to switch colors again. We've come back. We've done 2 rows in this color. It's time to switch colors again. Our blue is waiting here for us. So with those 3 loops left on my hook here, I haven't quite finished that last half double crochet. I'll just drop color B, pick up color A, yarn over, and pull through. Now, when you're carrying your yarn along the side like this, let me turn it over. It's a little easier to see and get the stitch marker out of the way here. You want to take just a little bit of time and make sure that you're not pulling it up super tightly. If you're pulling it up really tightly, if you tend to pull back on your yarn, you may find the sides of your scarf turning to sort of squinch together. If you make it too loose, you're going to have, let me try and pull it out here. You're going to have a big floppy thing to try and cover when you work your border, and we don't want that either. So what I like to do, and it's a little harder with this yarn because it has a little bit of fuzz to it, is just pull back and forth sort of like this and let it sort of settle out. Make sure the fabric feels nice and straight and flat. There's no pull, there's no extra. It's just sort of laying right there along the side without any excess. And then you'll be all set up to begin row 6 of our repeat. Okay, so now we're ready for row 6. I'm going to let my color B just hang out there on the side so I can pick it up when I'm ready to use it again. So for row 6, we begin with our chain 1 and half double crochet right in that first stitch. I'm going to go ahead and add a stitch marker right to the top of that one. And I'm actually going to take just a moment here. I want to show something that can happen with this pattern. You'll notice there's just a little bit starting here of my yarns getting twisted together. It's always a good idea every few rows to just take a moment and untwist those. It will save you a lot of trouble in the end. That said, once you've got them untwisted, go ahead and pull off some yarn so you're controlling your tension, not the ball of yarn itself. So that little side business handled, let's get back here to row 6. We've got our half double crochet in the first stitch, and then we are going to chain 1, skip the next stitch, which would be that one right there, and now it's time to woven treble again. So you can see sort of how our repeat is coming together here. We've got another set of those chain spaces, so we do another woven treble. We yarn over twice, in front of that chain space, behind the next chain space, and now the unworked stitch underneath is going to be that half double crochet right here. We'll turn it over so you can see. There's that half double crochet in between those chain spaces. Okay, so we want to make sure we don't pick up the loop from the chain space. We want to pick up the loops at the top of the half double crochet and pull those forward. Now, from here on out, as we work our repeats, when we work these woven trebles, you can see I'm working in the blue or color A, and I'm working into a blue or color A stitch. Again, the setup rows are a little different, but once we get into the repeat, you generally, except for those end stitches, are only working like colors into like. Let's continue. We chain 1, skip this next set of stitches, yarn over twice for our woven treble, find our next set of chain spaces. You can see there's a half double crochet stitch right underneath. So we go in front of that one, behind the one underneath, and then through the top of that stitch. If you need to just flip your work over here to find those loops, I often have to do it myself. Pull that right through. It's a little easier to see, hopefully, with the other color there, how that pops right through. And then we can finish our treble crochet. Let's do it again. Chain 1, skip that next set of stitches, yarn over twice, find that next set there, and we pull it up kind of high so you can see it hopefully against the table there. So we go in front of that one, behind that one, and right in the top of the stitch underneath. Peel back the previous row so you have access to just that stitch, and then finish your treble. Chain 1 and skip the next stitch. So of course we're going to continue that all the way across. We'll chain 1, skip that stitch, and then half double crochet in the very last stitch. All right, so here you can see I am at the end of row 6 with a half double crochet in that very last stitch and chain 1, skip 1 over the stitch before that. So again, if you want to, you can take some time and really pull up those rows and start seeing how this stitch pattern is coming together. But as of now, we're ready for row 7 of our repeat. Row 7 is just like row 5. We're going to chain 1, turn, half double crochet in each stitch, and chain 1 and skip 1 over each chain space. So we can put our half double crochet right in that first stitch. Find our stitch marker here. And then we can literally just, when we do the second row of each color, we can read the row before and see there's a chain 1, skip 1. So that's what we're doing too. Chain 1, skip 1, half double crochet in the next stitch. Chain 1, skip 1, half double crochet in the next stitch. So we're just skipping over those chain spaces. And we continue that all the way across to finish up row 7. And with this, we are almost finished with row 7, but remember, it's our second row in that color, so it's time to switch colors on the final stitch. When we've got our 3 loops on our hook, we go ahead and drop that color, find the next color there. Oops, that's the end. Let's find the end attached to the skein. There we go. Pull that one up, yarn over. Just make sure it's, like I say, loose, but not too loose, and pull it right through. There we go. Give that a little zhuzh, make sure it feels good, feels secure, and we are ready to begin that repeat again. We just began again with row 4. So let's take just a few of those stitches together. For row 4, we chain 1, turn, half double crochet in that first stitch. Remember, this is the first stitch we did of that repeat again. So we can put our stitch marker right back in that stitch if we'd like. And then we've got a set of chain spaces. So it's time for a woven treble. We yarn over twice. We go in front, behind, then through the stitch. Remember, now that we're into our stitch repeat, not just in our setup rows, we're only working like colors into like, except for the stitches at each end. So we finish up that treble crochet, and then we know we're going to chain one and skip those next stitches and do it again. Again, right back into that same color stitch, and then I just pull it forward and finish my treble crochet. Alrighty, so basically you just keep repeating rows 4 through 7 until the scarf measures at least 65 inches long, ending on a row 4 repeat. So that means I need to finish up this row 4 repeat, and you need to make quite a few more. After you've finished your last row 4 repeat and your scarf is again at least 65 inches long, then we'll be ready to come back for finishing row 1. All right, so when your scarf is about 65 inches long and you finished a row 4 repeat, then it's time for finishing row 1. We're going to be continuing here with color B, because it's our second row with this color. But now, instead of doing half double crochets, we're going to go back to those double crochets. So we're going to chain 3 here, and that will be the top of our first double crochet. So I'm going to put my stitch marker right in there. Again, you can use a double crochet substitute if you prefer. Then I'm going to turn. Then we're going to double crochet in the next stitch. Remember, this normally would have been a half double crochet row where we work into each stitch and then chain one and skip one. We're doing the same thing here, just with double crochets now instead. So we chain one, skip a chain one space, and double crochet in the next stitch all the way across. We're just making those spaces a little bit taller this time. So chain one, skip the chain space, double crochet in the next. Because we're in color B, we know we've got 2 stitches right next to each other at the end, just like we did at the beginning. So we'll have 2 double crochets right next to each other at the end. So here I've come to the end of finishing row 1, and you can see I've got those 2 double crochets here in those last 2 stitches, but I haven't quite finished that last double crochet. I stopped with 2 loops left on the hook because we're going to drop that color B for the last time for the scarf and pull up color A and yarn over and pull through that one. There we go. Give that another little wiggle so it can be nice and even. And now, I always like to do this as soon as I can to get it out of the way. We can go ahead and cut our color B here, whatever color that is that you are using. And then we can set that aside and no more tangles. From here on out, we'll just be using color A. So then we're ready for finishing row 2. For finishing row 2, we are going to start, again, we're back in color A. We want to chain 1, and we're going to single crochet in those first 2 stitches. I'm still going to use my stitch marker here to mark that first stitch. There we go. And then single crochet in the next stitch. Then we're going to woven treble in these next space here. So we yarn over twice, we go through. We can go in and pick up that first unworked stitch there. Make sure we're getting, oh, I got the space. That's why I like to flip it over sometimes. It's easier for me, and it might be for you too, to tell from this side of the stitch that I'm working into the top of the half double crochet. So a lot of times I will go ahead and just flip my work around to double check and make sure that I have put my hook in the right spot. So now I can grab that stitch, pull it forward, and finish our treble. Then I'm going to, instead of chain 1 and skipping 1, I'm going to single crochet in the top of that double crochet. And that is our repeat for this row. Woven treble where we can. Same sort of spaces we did here before. But then, accidentally pulled through 3 there. There we go. Instead of chain 1 and skip 1, we just single crochet right into the top of the stitch itself. So you can see how that's starting to sort of close up our row right there. And this is what it will look like on the other side. So we continue that all the way across with a single crochet in each of those last 2 stitches. And now we're ready for finishing row 3. We're simply going to chain 1, turn, and single crochet in each stitch across. When we get to the end of this row, however, we're not going to turn. We are instead going to move on to our border round. So here we are on our tiny little scarf, worked through finishing row 3, and we're ready for our border round. Now at the end of finishing row 3, it says do not turn. And then at the beginning of border round, it says turn. But by turn here, I don't mean flip it over like we usually do in working in rows. We're going to be turning this way to work along the side of our scarf. And of course, your scarf should be a whole lot longer unless you're just working up a little swatch like me. Now, you'll notice this first edge that we work along is the edge where all our yarn floats are. You can see they're kind of on the back of our work from this side, right there. So as we work along this edge, we want to make sure to enclose those floats inside those stitches. We're going to be just working single crochets evenly along. And you just want to make sure that those little floats, those little bits of yarn along the side are trapped inside, and then they will be hidden and nobody will know you didn't bother cutting your yarn after every 2 rows, because who wants to do that, right? So let's go ahead and begin border round together here. It's just the one round. If you wanted to add more or add a more decorative round, you absolutely could do that as well. So I'm going to go ahead and just chain 1, and then I'm going to single crochet evenly around. Now, one thing I like to do is make sure to put a stitch marker in this first stitch as well, so I know where my border began, because it can get really easy to get sort of lost here as you work along that last edge. So I'm going to go ahead and chain 1, and then just single crochet evenly along. So since I know this last row here was a single crochet, I'm just going to go right in the side of that row and put that stitch right there. And then for spacing, I usually have some good rules of thumb that I like to use. This scarf, because of the stitch pattern, kind of throws a lot of those sort of on its head. But looking at it, what I found is that really 2 stitches in the side of each color, if you will, really sort of gave me a really nice flat edge. Now, your stitching, your gauge, your tension, your hands are different than mine. So you might find that you need to put 3 stitches in one color and 2 in the next, 3 in one, 2 in the next. It might be different. Everybody's going to be a little bit different. The main point is just to make it lay nice and flat and even. The exact stitch count as you're working your border round does not matter at all. It's just a matter of making it look nice. So I just found 2 spots sort of along the side of each color here that I like to go in. And then, like I say, I'm going to make sure that that float there, you can see that little bit of blue that's covered, carrying along the side, it's inside that stitch. So now it's all hidden away. So then I find a second spot along that color. And then I just jump down to the next one. Again, make sure, maybe not the ends, we'll weave in those later, but any of those floats are inside those stitches. Let me carefully pull that up there and put a second one in that one. Again, whatever color they are, we just want them trapped inside. So you can see, if I straighten that out, those are all going to be trapped inside, and then we can weave in our ends when we're all finished. So let's take another quick look here at our finished scarf. Here we are. And I'll turn it around here so we can get a clear look at that edge. And you can see, if you look very closely, I pretty much worked 2 single crochets in the side of each color row here. We've got 2 in the white, 2 in the blue, 2 in the white, 2 in the blue. This one, I added a third one. Again, the exact stitch count doesn't matter. Try and keep it as much the same as you can, but you just want it to lay nice and flat and even, just like this. And I'm trying to see which one actually had my floats hidden in it. And it was this one. So you can see just how well, I had to really look close myself to see just how well those can be hidden. So we just work along one side here with our single crochets. When we get to the other end, we do a little bit of post stitches. You can follow the written pattern for that. Single crochet up the other side. And then, of course, when we get all the way down to the end, we want to repeat our post stitches. Oops, we were actually this way. Repeat our post stitches down here, and then we can finish off by joining to that first stitch of our border round. So that is how to work that stitch pattern for now in rows. I'm always zhuzhing and improving things, especially when I've come up with them on my own. But now let's talk about how we can work that same stitch pattern in the round for the mittens and the hat. Now let's talk about this stitch pattern when it's worked in the round, as seen in both the Woven Warmth Crochet hat and mittens. Now, the hat, we work from the top down. So we're actually working this direction. We work the top of the hat in our standard sort of flat circles to get the width, and then we're able to work our stitch pattern evenly. So we don't have to increase or decrease at all. We're just working it in the round. Now, you'll notice when we worked in rows, that was sort of important to making that stitch pattern for our scarf. We still want to work in rows for the hat and when we're making that cuff at the end of our mitten. So when we begin our hat, even at the top here, before it's really necessary, we are still going to work in what I like to call turned rounds or joined rows. Let me show you what that looks like. Here I have, let me get that sort of straightened out here, round 1 of our hat already almost finished, all except for the slip stitch. You'll see I've got my stitch markers in my first and last stitch of the round here. That way I won't work back into the slip stitch. And when you're working in turned rounds like this, it's extra important to have those stitch markers because it becomes extra easy to accidentally work into that slip stitch. So we're going to go ahead and put that slip stitch in there to finish up round 1. We have 12 double crochets worked into the magic circle. Again, if you'd prefer a different method for starting your hat, the main thing is to have 12 double crochets in a circle for round 1. However you'd like to get it started is totally fine. But then you'll notice on the instructions it says join and turn. So after we do that slip stitch, we go ahead and flip it over to work the other way. So now we start with our chain 3, which is going to count as our first double crochet. So again, I'm going to grab a third stitch marker and actually use that to mark the top of that stitch right there. Because since this counts as our first stitch, and again, you can use a double crochet substitute if you'd like, that means that first marked stitch is actually considered already worked. So, because this is the first stitch now of this round, so if you are doing a double crochet substitute where you work back down into the stitch, you want to make sure you work into that actual stitch. Then, after we make that first chain 3, we double crochet in the first stitch. So when it says chain 3, we've got the chain 3, double crochet in that first stitch, it's that first marked stitch. This is where having those stitch markers is so important because at a glance, you would really assume that slip stitch is the first stitch you want to work into. So now I can go ahead and pull that stitch marker out, and then I'm going to put 2 double crochets in each stitch around simply because that's what it calls for in round 2 of our hat. We're going from 12 stitches in round 1 to 24 in round 2. So this way with the stitch markers, it'll be a whole lot easier because as I come around, I'll see that that right there is the last place I'll work those last 2 stitches in. Again, because of the turned rounds, I would really be fooled without having those stitch markers to guide me. So I strongly recommend you use those when you are making your hat. I've been overconfident myself in the past, and I have learned my lesson. So as I say, the first few rounds of this hat really are just standard flat circles. And for the point of this video, I really want to focus in on our woven treble stitch pattern because that is sort of the unique portion of this pattern set. So go ahead and follow along with the written instructions. If you haven't made a flat circle before, this is a pretty good introduction. And we will finish up here rows. It would be rows, I believe. Let me just double check here with my instructions. Looks like rows 1 through 5 give us our big circle here. We can actually check that on our hat here. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Yep. And then we'll be ready to start our repeat. So here I have a small example circle. I've only worked 3 rows. Again, for the full-size hat, you need to work the first 5 rows of the hat, but it's a small circle to sample with. I also have a half-finished mitten here. As you can see, I am still working up the hand and I still have the thumb to go. And here is a finished thumb. They brought a stitch marker with it. A finished thumb and a finished mitten. Now, I want you to notice that the mitten itself is quite plain. I made this to be a very plain mitten. They match. The right and left are exactly the same. This is a good standard mitten you could mix and match with any set. Working the stitch pattern into the body of the mitten would have made it less useful as a mitten. So for the mitten, I've just simply added it as a decorative cuff. You can see right here, it's a fold-up cuff. We have a ribbed cuff right here. And then we just go ahead and add a few decorative rounds of this pattern at the end when we're finished. And when we apply that cuff, although let me even fold that again here, you can see we're working into the sides of those rows of the cuff. It's essentially the same thing that we do once we begin the sides of the hat. So let's come on over here to this sample for our hat and make the sides of our hat, which would be a bigger version of what we've got going on here on our cuff. So the sides of our hat begin with round 6. So we want to go ahead and turn to the wrong side of our fabric here, which we would be doing after round 5 naturally. And we begin again with a chain 4, and that's going to count as our first double crochet and chain 1. So again, we want to mark the top of that third chain. So we can mark the top of our double crochet there. And then we chain 1 more. Then we are going to very simply skip the next stitch. Now remember, this is our first marked stitch right here. So this stitch is actually this stitch. I know that sounds really weird, but this stitch is considered being, if you will, in that stitch. So then we skip the stitch after that and double crochet in the stitch after that. So we've got our marked stitch, the next stitch, the stitch after that is where we put our double crochet. Right there. So when we hold it up straight like that, it kind of makes a little bit more sense, hopefully. Now we can go ahead and get that stitch marker out of the way, and then continue all the way around. Chain 1, skip 1, double crochet in the next. Chain 1, skip 1, double crochet in the next. Very similar to our setup rows here on the previous project, the scarf. But of course, we're working in the round, so I'll see you when we get to the end of round 6 of the sides of the hat. So here we are at the end of round 6. You'll notice I've worked a double crochet, chain 1, and when I skip 1, it's going to be that last marked stitch right down there. And then we are going to slip stitch, get my hook on the right side of my yarn there, slip stitch right in the top of that marked chain. There we go. Now, one thing I forgot to do was mark that chain space. It's sort of our last stitch, but that's going to be pretty obvious as we turn and work the next row here, so I'm not going to worry too much about that one right now. I am going to leave, of course, that stitch marker in there. For round 7, we begin with a chain 2, 1, 2. Let's go ahead and mark that chain 2. Now we're going to turn. Remember, now we're going to be working from the outside of the hat for round 7. After we chain 2, we skip the chain space and half double crochet in the next stitch. A little different here at the beginning and the end, but we're going to be doing essentially the same things we did in the scarf. Chain 1, skip the chain 1 space, half double crochet in the next stitch. Chain 1, skip the next chain space, half double crochet in the next stitch. So continue this all the way around for round 7, and I'll see you at the end. So here I am at the end of round 7. You can see I half double crocheted in that last marked stitch, so I'm going to go ahead and move that stitch marker up to this stitch now, like so. And then to finish up round 7, we're going to join with a slip stitch in this chain 2 space, so just this whole space right here. But we're going to join with that slip stitch with color B. This is where we switch our colors. So I put my hook right in that chain 2 space. We'll go ahead and drop color A. Find my end here of color B. I always like to leave a nice good 6 to 8 inches, honestly, with these, just in case they pull out a little bit. Gives me a little extra room to pull them back in until I get those ends woven in. We can just pull that right on through and make our slip stitch with our new color. Now, again, we want to leave color A just hanging out on the inside of our hat along with our ends, so we can pick up our next color as we continue to switch colors as we work through the following rows. So now we're ready to begin round 8 with color B. Of course, we need to turn again. I like to make a point to turn in these so you don't forget. And then we begin with a chain of 2, 1, 2, and skip the first stitch. So that chain 2 is kind of going to be our big first chain 2 space, chain 2 here. But now you can see we've got that stitch right there. That's the stitch we skip. And then we woven treble in those stitches right there. So this chain 2 space is kind of that first stitch stand-in again. So let's go ahead and move that stitch marker right up here. Just going to really take my time with this because I know this can get a little confusing. We're working from the inside of the hat. Here's that initial end from our magic circle. I always leave that attached there so I can always tell at a glance. I've got my chain 2, and now we're working back from the other direction. So we're going to skip this stitch right here, come over to these sets of woven trebles right here, or chain spaces, I should say, so we can woven treble. We yarn over twice. We go same thing in front of that first one, behind the next one, down into the unworked stitch. Grab that stitch, pull it up, yarn over, pull up our loop, and finish our treble, just like we did before. And now, from here, should be very familiar. Chain 1, skip those next set of stitches, woven treble in the next set of chain 1s in that next unworked stitch right there, all the way at the bottom. This is our first color B row, so we're working into a color A row to make these trebles. But we know as we continue on down, eventually we'll only work like colors into like. Again, chain 1, skip the next stitch, and work that woven treble right in between. So continue on around, and I'll see you as we get to the end of round 8. So here I am almost done with row 8, but I wanted to take the time to finish it with you here because this is something so easy to miss. We see the stitch marker here. We've got our chain one. We think it's time to join up. Nope, look closely. There is another set of chain spaces there for us to woven treble into. So we're going to skip these two, and then that last marked section is going to get a woven treble. So I will put that last stitch right in there. And if you wanted to leave that stitch marker all the way down there at the bottom, you could. But we just look for that and pull it on up. And if we look closely, we notice we finish this repeat with our woven treble. We do not chain one again. Let's go ahead and get this stitch marker out of the way. Sort of straighten up our work so you can see what's going on. There we are. So there's that last woven treble. We've got that initial chain two space. Since the woven treble, is our last stitch of this round, I'm going to put a stitch marker right in the top of it there. And my loop got twisted. There we go. Now, we're all set up. We've got our last woven treble made. You can see how it sort of joins up there. It looks a little crazy because of the turned rounds, but that's where it needs to be. We've got our last stitch marked. We're going to slip stitch right in that initial chain two, like so. And then we're ready to turn and work round 9. Round 9, we're going to simply chain 1, half double crochet right in that first stitch. You can see now we're on an odd numbered round, so we're back on the outside of the hat. You can just flip it right back outside if you want to. Don't have to. You can work it as a bowl or a hat, however you like. Just turn it right side out when you go to wear it. There we go. So we've got our half double crochet in our first stitch, and then we're simply chain 1, skip that chain 1 space, half double crochet in the next, chain 1, skip that chain 1 space, half double crochet in the next, and I will see you as we get to the end here of round 9. So as we come to the end of round 9, our repeat ends with our half double crochet, chain 1, and skip 1. We can see that's that last chain 1 space there that we skipped below. So we'll put our stitch marker here in that new chain 1 space we just made and finish up by joining with a slip stitch to that first half double crochet. But it was our second row in this color, so we know we are going to switch over to our previous color, color A. So again, we just drop that. You can see we're on the outside of the hat. So we're in the right spot. We can find our color B, or our color A rather, that's still attached to the skein there. Take our time and find it. And then same thing. We just go ahead and finish that stitch with that color. Make sure it's not too tight, pulling along on the inside of the hat. There we are. But now we're ready for round 10. Round 10 is our last round of our repeat when working this stitch pattern in the round. So we're going to start with our color A here. I'm going to turn again. We want to make sure we're on an even numbered round, so we want to be on the inside of the hat. I chain 1, and right away we can see, we take our time here, pull all our ends out of the way. The first thing we come to is a set of chain spaces. So our first stitch is going to be a woven treble. So we yarn over twice, go in front of that one, behind the next one, and find the stitch underneath. Now, I'd have to take some time, pull your stitches apart here and look for it. There it is. Right there. You can pull that loop forward, just as we did before. Get all those other stitches out of the way. It's just yarn, it'll unfold, and we can finish our treble. And then it's back to our stitch pattern before. Now, since this was our first stitch of this round, go ahead and move that stitch marker from that chain space up into this first stitch. Again, whenever working in turned rounds, I find it so important to use these stitch markers, but with this sort of stitch pattern, where it's a little more complicated, even more so. So now we've got our first stitch marked here for round 10. We chain 1, skip the next stitch, and go back down here for this next woven treble. Just take your time, find the top of that stitch, pull it forward, and treble again. Oops, that one was just a double crochet. Let me pull that back out. Lost my chain 1 too. So we chain 1 again, yarn over twice, go down, pick up that stitch. There we go. You can always double check it on the other side, make sure, yep, we're in the right spot. Pull that loop up. And now finish our treble. There we are. So then back to that same stitch pattern as before. Chain 1, skip 1, woven treble into the stitch below. All right, so here I am at the end of round 10. I've got my chain 1. I'm going to skip that last stitch and slip stitch rather, to that first stitch of the round. And then I'll be ready for round 11. There we are. Now, rounds 11 through 16 are the repeats that we make working the sides of the hat. Round 17 and 18 sort of finish it off, a lot like what we did with the scarf, and then there's a simple brim at the end. And now you've seen how to crochet this unique stitch pattern in both rows and in the round. And that's how to crochet the Woven Warmth Crochet Set. All of these patterns you'll find for free on mooglyblog.com. Thanks so much for watching, and don't forget to like and subscribe.